prostitutes without shame. Women, however, were bound to absolute fidelity. In Rome, sexual morality was not about equality, it was about control. Yet even these restrictions could backfire. When Augustus' own daughter, Julia, was accused of flagrant affairs, the scandal nearly shattered his authority. The law he created to enforce chastity ended up humiliating him. The theater of reputation mattered more than truth. Rumors could destroy as effectively as evidence. A whisper of impropriety might haunt a woman for life, even if unfounded. Seneca, the philosopher, warned that true virtue mattered less in Rome than the appearance of virtue. A woman might live modestly, but if the city gossiped otherwise, her reputation was lost, and with it, her family's standing. This obsession with appearances created a culture of performance, where households staged chastity like a public play, hiding scandal behind veils of modesty. The double standard, the irony, is impossible to ignore. While women were exalted for chastity, men often boasted of their conquests. Writers like Catullus and Martial filled verses with sexual exploits, mocking women who failed to meet impossible standards. Yet, the harsher the restrictions, the more Rome obsessed over transgression. Adultery, forbidden though it was, became a favorite subject of gossip, theater, and satire. Pudicitia may have been worshipped, but it was also constantly tested. The legacy of Pudicitia. At its core, Pudicitia reveals the truth of Roman intimacy. Sexuality was never simply private. It was political currency, family honor, and public spectacle. Women bore the burden of embodying this ideal, but in doing so, they sometimes carved out unexpected power. Some, like Livia, mastered the role to influence empires. Others, like Lucretia, paid with their lives, reshaping history in the process. As we leave behind the stories of Pudicitia, we see clearly, in Rome, desire was always entangled with discipline, and virtue was never just about purity, it was about power. Part 4: Marriage as a lance. A Roman wedding was not a matter of love, it was a matter of survival. For us, marriage is often imagined as a personal choice, a union of affection. But in ancient Rome, a wedding was first and foremost a contract, a binding alliance between families, a calculated move in the chess game of politics. Behind every kiss and ritual blessing lay ambition, strategy, and power. Marriage as a political weapon for Rome's elite, marriage was diplomacy. A senator's daughter might be promised to the son of a rival family, not to heal old grudges but to ensure bloodlines intertwine. An ambitious man might marry upward, securing wealth or political protection through his wife's dowry. The bride herself had little say. At times, she was barely more than a teenager, her future mapped out by the ambitions of fathers and uncles. Her body was not her own, it was a vessel for heirs, a link between clans. Even among ordinary Romans, marriage carried more weight than sentiment. It bound households together, creating economic security, social status, and legitimacy for children. The rituals of union Roman weddings were filled with symbolism, each gesture charged with meaning. The bride wore a flame-colored veil, the flammeum, its bright orange hue evoking fire, purity, and fertility. Her hair was parted into 6 locks using the tip of a spear, a gesture tying her fertility to Rome's martial destiny, as though even marriage was another battlefield. As the ceremony began, offerings were made to the household gods, asking for fertility, harmony, and prosperity. The couple clasped right hands in a ritual called the dextrum iunctio, symbolizing their union before witnesses. When the bride entered her new home, she was carried over the threshold, not out of romance, but out of fear. To stumble on the way in would be a dark omen, one suggesting future dishonor or infertility. Every detail reinforced the same truth. This union was not about private affection, but about the destiny of the family. The wedding night, if the wedding was a public spectacle, the wedding night was its private proving ground. Writers like Pliny and Ovid hint at the anxieties surrounding this. The bride was expected to prove her virginity, her purity guaranteed only once blood stained the sheets. This was not a night of tenderness, but of scrutiny, a ritual that could secure or ruin reputations. For men, the pressure was no less intense. Failure to consummate the marriage invited ridicule, whispered jokes that could erode political standing. Intimacy was never simply personal in Rome. It was a performance, judged by the eyes of family and society. Dowries and wealth. At the core of marriage lay the dowry. The bride's family provided land, money, or slaves, handed over not as gifts but as financial security for the union. Dowries could be enormous, transforming a man's fortunes overnight. But they also came with obligations. Should the wife be mistreated, her family could demand the return of her dowry, a threat powerful enough to restrain even ambitious husbands. Marriage, therefore, was not only a personal relationship. It was an economic contract, binding two households into a shared future of profit, risk, and legacy. Divorce and flexibility. Unlike many cultures, Rome was surprisingly permissive about divorce. If a marriage ceased to serve its political or economic purpose, it could be dissolved with little ceremony. A husband might send his wife back to her father with her dowry. A wife, too, could initiate divorce, though this often carried more stigma. This flexibility reveals the transactional nature of Roman unions. Love might bloom, affection might grow, but ultimately, marriage was judged on its usefulness. If the alliance failed, it ended, and quickly. Augustus and marriage laws. Rome's obsession with marriage was so central that even emperors sought to control it. Augustus, determined to restore what he saw as traditional morals, passed laws encouraging marriage and penalizing celibacy. Unmarried men faced political disadvantage. Widows were pressured to remarry within a set time. Adultery was criminalized as a public offense. These laws revealed the anxiety at the heart of Roman society, that without strong families and legitimate heirs, the Republic, and later, the Empire, might collapse. Yet even Augustus could not escape the contradictions of Roman intimacy. His own daughter, Julia, defied the laws by taking lovers openly, turning her father's moral reforms into a public humiliation. Love amid the alliances. And yet, despite the coldness of contracts, affection did exist. Letters survive of husbands grieving for their wives, wives honoring their husbands at funerals with inscriptions of love and loyalty. Pliny the Younger wrote movingly about his wife Calpurnia, praising her intelligence and devotion. Their letters suggest genuine companionship, proof that even in a society that treated marriage as politics, the human heart could not be entirely Still, such love was the exception, not the expectation. For most Romans, marriage was a duty first, a partnership second, and a romance only by chance. The unmarried and the marginalized. Not everyone fit into this framework. Prostitutes, slaves, and concubines existed outside the formal structures of marriage. Their unions, if they had them, were unofficial, unrecognized by law. Yet these relationships often carried deep emotion, even if denied legitimacy. The contrast was sharp. Noble women were paraded in flame-colored veils to secure dynasties, while countless others were excluded from the very institution that defined Roman society. Marriage as the foundation of Rome. In the end, marriage in Rome was not just about individuals. It was the foundation of the state itself. Through it, bloodlines merged, wealth circulated, and power consolidated. Every alliance was a building block in the great edifice of Rome's empire. But beneath the rituals and contracts, behind the veils and vase, lingered human stories, of brides too young to understand their fate, of husbands torn between ambition and affection, of couples who found genuine love despite the constraints of politics. In Rome, to marry was not simply to unite two people. It was to bind families, to shape legacies, to weave another thread into the vast tapestry of power. Part 5. The sexual hierarchy. Rome was not a land of equality. Not in politics, not in law, and certainly not in sex. To understand Roman intimacy, we must cast aside our modern assumptions. Love was not the guiding principle. Pleasure was not always private. Desire was structured by status, law, and power. Who could touch whom, and how, was never a matter of personal preference alone. It was a hierarchy, one that revealed the very soul of Roman society. Sex as power. In Rome, sex was never just sex. It was a display of dominance. The ideal Roman man was expected to take the active role. To penetrate was to command, to be penetrated was to submit. This logic went far beyond the bedroom. It was a metaphor for Rome itself, a city that conquered and ruled through force. What mattered was not the gender of one's partner, but their status. A citizen male who allowed himself to be penetrated risked disgrace, branded as effeminate, unfit for political life. Yet that same man could lie with women, boys, or slaves, provided he always played the active part. Power, not preference, set the rules. Women and expectations. For Roman women, sexuality was tightly bound to marriage. A respectable matron's honor lay in chastity, fidelity, and the production of legitimate heirs. Adultery was not simply a betrayal of affection. It was a crime, punishable by law, threatening the purity of the bloodline. A woman caught in adultery could be divorced, disgraced, even exiled. Yet this harsh moral code applied only to wives of citizen families. Prostitutes, slaves, and concubines existed outside these boundaries. A man might use them freely, without shame. Respectable women were guarded, while others were left exposed, their bodies woven into the fabric of male privilege. Slaves and exploitation. At the bottom of the hierarchy stood the enslaved. Their bodies were not their own. A slave could be compelled to satisfy a master's desires at any time, with no legal protection. Male and female slaves alike were subject to exploitation, their consent irrelevant. Writers of the time mentioned this casually, without horror. For Romans, it was simply part of the order of things. Wealthy households often kept young boys or girls for sexual. Some were purchased for this purpose alone. In the language of the elite, such arrangements were not called abuse. They were privileges of ownership. Rome's sexual hierarchy was therefore also a hierarchy of freedom. To own one's body was to be free. To lack that right was to be utterly vulnerable. Male desire and the stigma of passivity. The Romans did not condemn same-sex relations outright. What they condemned was submission. To be the active partner, penetrating, was entirely acceptable, even with another man. But to be penetrated was to risk social death. A citizen male who took the passive role could be mocked as weak, unmanly, or corrupt. The satirist Juvenal ridiculed men he accused of effeminacy, painting lurid pictures of senators who dressed as brides. Political enemies often hurled such accusations, equating sexual passivity with moral weakness. For Romans, masculinity was fragile. It had to be defended constantly, not only on the battlefield or in the forum, but in the bedchamber. Prostitution and the marketplace of sex prostitution was everywhere in Rome. Brothels lined the inns, doubled as places of trade in both food and flesh. Graffiti in Pompeii reveals men boasting of encounters, listing prices, even rating women by name. Prostitutes were registered by the state, taxed like any other profession. They had no claim to respectability, but they provided an outlet that Roman men considered essential. For the poor, sex was a purchase. For the wealthy, it was a privilege. In both cases, desire was commodified, stripped of intimacy, reduced to transaction. The double standard. This system rested on a double standard. Men could indulge widely, women could not. A man might keep mistresses, sleep with slaves, or visit brothels without risking reputation. A woman who strayed even once could lose everything: her marriage, her dowry, her standing in society. The hypocrisy was clear even to Roman writers. Some, like Ovid, mocked it, weaving tales of women who found ways to outwit their husbands. But satire could not change the reality. The sexual hierarchy was a cage, and women bore the heaviest chains. Law and control. Under Augustus, the sexual hierarchy became law. His Lex Julia de Adulteriis criminalized adultery, not as a private sin but as a public crime. Husbands were required to prosecute unfaithful wives. Fathers could even kill daughters caught in the act, provided it happened in their own home. Yet the law applied unevenly. Men's infidelities were tolerated, women's punished. The legislation itself revealed the truth. Sex was never merely personal in Rome. It was a matter of state, pleasure and secrecy, and yet, beneath the rigidity of law and hierarchy, human desire remained unruly. Totes whispered of secret affairs, of women slipping out in the night, of men disguising themselves to reach forbidden lovers. Ovid's Ars Amatoria even offered a handbook of seduction, mocking Augustus's stern morality. Archaeology too preserves glimpses of Rome's private passions, frescoes of lovers intertwined, amulets depicting explicit scenes, erotic graffiti scrawled by anonymous hands. Despite the hierarchy, despite the laws, desire leaked through the cracks, proving impossible to contain. Sex and empire. In many ways, Rome's sexual hierarchy mirrored its empire. Rome conquered, dominated, and ruled. Its citizens were the actors, its subjects the acted upon. To penetrate was to control, to be penetrated was to yield. This logic seeped into every level of life, shaping not only intimacy but politics, law, and identity. Even love itself could not escape the shadow of power. Conclusion: the chains of desire. The Romans lived in a world where intimacy was never equal. Every encounter reflected the hierarchy of their society: man over woman, free over slave, citizen over foreigner, active over passive. And yet, within this structure, people still longed, still sought connection, still defied the rule. Behind the laws and stigmas lay countless hidden stories, of tenderness in forbidden places, of secret lovers risking exile, of enslaved souls clinging to dignity despite exploitation. Rome's sexual hierarchy was unyielding, but humanity persisted within it, whispering against the silence of power. Part 6: Slaves of Desire. If Rome was built on conquest, then its households were built on slaves. They cleaned its floors, cooked its food, raised its children. And just as often, they satisfied its desires. To be enslaved in Rome was to be stripped not only of freedom but of ownership of one's own body. A slave could be beaten, sold, or discarded at will.